the first GOP gubernatorial primary debate, a compromise on the antisemitism bill, plus AG candidate qualification language removed, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending March 15th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Indiana's 6 Republican candidates for governor weren't shy about attacking each other during the campaign's first formal debate. U.S. Senator Mike Braun considered the frontrunner was a frequent target, including from former State Commerce Secretary Brad Chambers.
I think Hoosiers are curious why you're a one-term senator and why you are running for governor. I mean, if I look back at your 2018 campaign ads, you said you were opposed to career politicians. This seems like you're heading down the path of a career politician.
Braun defended his record in the U.S. Senate, touting his fiscal responsibility, though he voted for legislation that added trillions to the national debt.
When you're one of 100 and you have a record like I take away from there, being named one of the most effective U.S. senators as a freshman Senate office, imagine what you can do when you can set the agenda.
Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch was a target from several others who seek to tie her to the administration she served in the last 7 years. That included criticism from candidate Jamie Reitenour over COVID-19 policies.
I would have loved to see the lieutenant governor out in front of the State House during COVID, telling everyone that they did not have to get a vaccine. Though Crouch largely stayed on message, she did address those criticisms.
We can't go back and change what happened, but I've learned from the mistakes of our top executive.
But it was former Attorney General Curtis Hill who had the sharpest attacks of the evening, positioning himself as the candidate with the most proven conservative record.
Lieutenant Governor wants to not talk about the past. Well, we know why. Because she's tied to the past of a failed administration.
Fort Wayne businessman Eric Doden largely stayed above the fray, focusing on his talking points and not directing criticism at any specific candidate.
We are not going to solve the problems of the United States from Washington, D.C. down. I can assure you of that. We see the dysfunction. We're going to solve the problems from local leaders in this room up.
Early in-person voting for Indiana's primary begins April 9th. Did anyone stand out in the first formal GOP gubernatorial primary debate? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney. Republican Chris Mitchem. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers. And Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Ann DeLaney, there were attacks at a lot of different candidates, from a lot of different candidates. But are you a little surprised they weren't all directed at Mike Braun?
No, I wasn't, because when you have a primary that large, it's going to be a food fight. I mean, somebody could win with 21% of the vote. You know, it's possible. And I know Mike Braun's ahead at the moment. I'm not sure what office he's running for or any of the other ones, since all he wants to talk about is the border and, you know, all this nonsense that has nothing to do with the office that he's currently seeking. Could be confused, because this is the third office he's sought. You know, he was in the legislature, he was in the U.S. Senate, and now he thinks he wants to be governor. But the interesting thing about this is that the only takeaway, we didn't have any discussion, meaningful programs advanced for the fact that third graders can't read, or that we're losing 25,000 college graduates every year, or how do we fund our roads, and how do we deal with Medicaid. None of those discussions, meaningful solutions to those issues, were offered. Instead, all we talk about are the things that they don't have any control over. And the one thing that they do have control over, that we can be assured of, is when we have another pandemic, and we will have another pandemic, you're going to have whoever the governor is up there saying, don't wear a mask, don't get vaccinated, don't shut down. And we'll see whether 24,000 Hoosiers obviously dying from COVID was not enough for these people.
That for 60 days now, so.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. Are you a little surprised they're not all directing a lot more attention at Braun?
Not really, just because I think one of the easiest kind of low-hanging fruit is to attack the Holcomb-Crouch administration for how they handled COVID. I mean, that's pretty easy with the masks and things like that.
Yeah, but the Republican primary, that's going to...
Right. But I think to Ann's point, with the food fight, if somebody criticizes you over here, then you have time for a rebuttal where you're probably going to criticize somebody else, and it just kind of goes everywhere. And I think that would be a benefit of either a smaller group of people in a primary debate, or I think for the first time in my life, I think if the debate would have went another 30 minutes longer, because they started kind of getting more feisty at the end and kind of getting deeper into the issues, I think that would have been beneficial. But I was actually kind of most impressed, I think, at the end of the night by Brad Chambers, actually. I think he came out and did a really good job of kind of doing the Trumpian-esque directly attacking people, I think, more than most others did. And I thought he also had a really good line about the Leap District and kind of vigorously defending that. He got a really, good response from the crowd. So I think he did a good job of maybe not putting himself into the upper echelon, but kind of establishing himself as a top candidate.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that, because that Brad Chambers moment struck me too. So there were the things they were attacking different candidates for all kind of fell in the same line. The attacks on Braun were, well, you didn't do anything in Washington, D.C. for 6 years, so why are you coming back here now to run for something? Why can't you stay out there and do the job you were sent there to do? The attacks on Crouch is primarily around COVID-19 policies. And then a lot of attacks, as there have been on Chambers, for the IEDC, the LEAP project. And he parried those away better than anybody else parried away the attacks, which was, listen, we are competing with other states and other countries in a global marketplace, and this is the way you have to do that. And I'm not going to apologize for it. This is the way you have to compete for the projects we need to grow as a state. So is that going to play well enough with a Republican primary?
Well, it's the only choice he has, really. I mean, he's not that far detached. He's not Eric Doden, where there's a period of time between your tenure atop that agency and your run for governor. He owns it. That was his doing. And I think he believes it, too. So it would be folly for him to stand up there now and say, in the 2 months or since I left this, I've seen the light. Mm-hmm. So I think he's making the best of the situation. And again, we would hope as a state that that gamble pays off, that the investment does bring the kinds of jobs and the kind of investment that he would hope. It's interesting, Chris, you mentioned that he might have taken this Trumpian, I think you called that approach. Yet he's the least Trump-like probably candidate on 100%. There. So interesting that you can maybe borrow the tactics without embracing the message.
That could be a good middle line. I don't know.
I should copyright that before we're done.
Ultimately, because there was the food fight, if you want to use that analogy, it only got a little food fight-ish right at the end. I think, to your point, it didn't really ramp up until Brad Chambers really started it. But does that ultimately just help Mike Braun even more?
Yeah, I don't know. Other than, I think there were some, if they were trying to go after Mike Braun, they definitely missed some opportunities. I think Curtis Hill had the best statement about him, which was basically like, we send him there to do a job and he's leaving before he's done it. Like, what did you do for us and that. But Senator Braun has a lot of unpopular votes, both in the Senate and when he was a lawmaker. Right. People talk about gas taxes all the time. He voted for the largest gas tax increase in Indiana history, and no one has brought that up. So there are still ways to go after him. Obviously, qualified immunity has become an issue in the ads. So I think it'll probably ramp up in the next one, and we've got 4 or 5 more of these debates/forums.
This also might be a recognition that there is still a large undecided faction. I think if the poll numbers that we've seen were more settled and say the I don't knows or the undecideds weren't a third of the electorate or more. In fact, maybe 40-some%. Yeah. If in fact Braun had 75% at this point, you would see people getting every arrow, every firearm, rhetorical firearm.
He wouldn't even show up. He'd pull the Trump and wide
exactly. That's absolutely right.
To me, that's an indication that people still, yes, they want to chip away at the perceived leader, but at the same time, they don't want to.
They're trying to win voters.
You still need to win voters, too. And that tells me that maybe there is an opening for other candidates.
Lawmakers in the final hours of session almost unanimously approved a bill to define and ban anti-Semitism in state public education institutions. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Violet Comber-Weiland reports the measure's language sought to find a balance between what each chamber had originally approved.
The amended bill uses the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, but leaves out IHRA's examples of anti-Semitism. Carol Auslander is with the Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council. She says the group is happy with the bill and that the reference to IHRA is also indirectly incorporating the definition's examples of anti-Semitism.
We feel very strongly that since the 11 examples are included within IHRA, that those are being incorporated by reference.
Earlier versions of the bill, including IHRA's examples, ignited controversy, with critics saying the examples conflate criticism of the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. Auslander says these examples are important as they provide necessary context to combat anti-Semitism.
Chris Mitchem, how should Hoosiers feel about the purported compromise in this bill?
I really do think they should be pleased for the simple fact that when you have such a sensitive issue like this, I can't think of a time when, at the end of the day, when the dust is settled, at least when it was initially settled, both sides of the aisle, or both sides of the issue, the Jewish community and those opposed, were pleased with the bill. They both issued statements and said, we like the way this is and we support it coming into law. Now, since then, I think other voices have kind of come out of the woodwork and expressed some concerns, but regarding how they should feel about the actual bill that was passed, I think a lot of credit goes to Chris Jeter and Aaron Freeman. I can count on two hands the amount of time this bill was on life support during the session. I mean, the House passed it as expected, but then the Senate gutted it, and it could have effectively died right then and there, but they continued to work on it. And then I think in the conference committee, there were 15 different revisions or something like that of them trying to get it to a good spot that could also be ultimately be almost unanimously approved. But either way you feel about it, I mean, I think it's 35 states have enshrined something similar, whether it be a resolution or an executive order, but only 5 or 6 of those states have actually enshrined in code protections for the Jewish community. So I think that's a big deal, no matter what the bill says. And I would hope that those that are opposed to it kind of don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, late last Friday after this bill passed and as the session wrapped up, I think everybody was like, wow, look at this. What a great example of legislative compromise, the way the process is supposed to work. Right. We had 2 chambers in the building who felt a little differently about how to define this issue. They came and found a compromise that had 1 no vote across both chambers in the final vote. And then some stuff has happened this week. Todd Rokita came out and called it a toothless mess. A more conservative Jewish organization in the state who say they authored or drafted the bill for Chris Jeter, who didn't really, as far as I'm aware, show up much during session to talk about it. But now they're saying, oh, the governor should veto this. And then the governor yesterday, as we tape this, we don't know if he's going to sign or veto the bill or let it become law without his signature. But he sounded yesterday like he was close to vetoing this bill. Are you surprised at the turnaround in 1 week?
Yeah, actually I am, because I agree with Chris that this was an accomplishment. I mean, there's no question that anti-Semitism is real. There's no question. And it seems to me to have a statement in code that says that we don't want that in Indiana is a pretty positive thing. The idea that we don't have examples in it, we don't have examples in any legislation. When you define rape, you don't come back and say, well, if he bought dinner, maybe it's not. You don't do that, okay? You don't do that in the code. And so I think it was an effective compromise. I think it states a principle that's worth supporting. And Rokita, the terminology he used, that it would appeal to Jew haters, why would you use that kind of offensive language? Who is he talking to, okay? Who is he trying to appeal to? I mean, I find that offensive, and I'm not Jewish. It makes it seem as if all the stereotypes of the original sin of Europe is anti-Semitism, in my view, and it just plays into all of those.
Well, and because, the opposition in this bill wasn't, oh, we're super in favor of anti-Semitism. Right. It was by using some of these examples seem to equate criticism of the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. And that's what lawmakers were trying to avoid, because that gets into free speech issues and things like that, and even Islamophobia. I'll ask you the same question. Are you surprised at what's happened over the last week?
Yeah, a little bit. I definitely think when these examples came in, it's kind of like the anti-obscenity stuff. You know it when you see it. That's how I feel about anti-Semitism, too. You know it when you see it. And trying to define it very structurally and then give examples. Anytime you give a bunch of examples, suddenly, so if I say I disagree with how Israel is handling, Palestinians in Gaza, am I an anti-Semite? And that was the question coming from the other side, which is, of course, we're against anti-Semitism. We don't want to discriminate against Jewish people, but we also should be allowed to have opinions on the actions that are being taken by the country of Israel.
By the government of,
Correct.
Exactly. And there was originally language in the bill that explicitly said it wasn't. They ended up taking that out, but they also took out the examples that seemed to conflate the two. If the governor vetoes this, what does the legislature that voted overwhelmingly for this bill, what did they do?
Part of it, I think, depends on what happens in world affairs and geopolitics. This bill had been offered last year. It made it through one chamber, not another. Obviously, what happened with Hamas back on the 7th was largely an impetus to move it much further this year and put it in the headlines. So I think a lot depends on that.
And to be fair, not just what happened in Israel, but also we have seen since that a sharp spike in anti-Semitic incidents across the country
and Islamophobia as well, it seems. Let me say this. There are a lot of ways to measure bills, and various groups like to measure bills. I'm not going to talk about good idea, bad idea. I will say hate. Let's stipulate hate is bad. But as I said a month ago, you can't ban stupidity. You can try, but you can't. So here's the measure. Bear with me. If you look at how much time was spent on a bill and how much rhetoric was expended and how much energy was expended versus the tangible impact in reality, that's got to be the widest gap almost of any bill.
Yeah. I mean, there has been some concern that some of Indiana's higher education institutions weren't taking some of these incidents seriously enough. But the bill without those examples sends a clear message to them like, hey, you need to take this stuff more seriously.
The bill is a message.
It is.
The bill is a message. It's all about a message.
Right.
There's nothing in the bill that says, and if you don't, this has to happen.
Right. And that doesn't solve it once and for all. Litigation, if there were some action taken against a professor or a student leader or something, that's not the end of it.
No.
That is just the start of it. Yeah. So welcome to a long, protracted a bit of litigation where perhaps the examples and whether they or not they were included might be germane to that discussion.
We don't have legislative history in Indiana either.
That's true. Time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question is, did Indiana lawmakers strike the right balance on the anti-Semitism bill? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you who will win Indiana's Republican gubernatorial primary. We put all 6 up there. 68% said Mike Braun, 17% said Suzanne Crouch, 7% with Brad Chambers, 4% with Eric Doden, 3% with Curtis Hill, and 1% with Jamie Reitenour. I will note we had more than double the normal number of responses to last week's question. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Language to disqualify candidates for attorney general if they face certain sanctions to their law license was removed from a bill on the Senate floor and never made it back into legislation before lawmakers ended their session. An amendment in the Senate Elections Committee said a candidate for AG is disqualified if the Supreme Court disbars them or suspends their law license without automatic reinstatement within a year of the election. That provision was removed from the bill on the Senate floor without explanation or debate. Senate President Pro Tem Roderick Bray says there's still a need to address what many perceive as a gap in state law on attorney general candidates, but he says not doing so this session came down to timing.
It's a difficult and maybe inappropriate thing to do in an election year. We can take a look at another time to see if we can fill that gap.
Republicans said the original language was not aimed at current Attorney General Todd Rokita, who received a public reprimand from the Indiana Supreme Court and faces another inquiry from the State Attorney Disciplinary Commission. Still, when the language was originally added to the bill, Rokita accused lawmakers of being deep state players who were taking away people's power. Niki Kelly, lawmakers said the original language had nothing to do with current AG Todd Rokita and the situation he's facing. You can believe that or not. But did removing it have something to do with current Attorney General Todd Rokita?
Quite possibly. Look, I don't think it's necessarily bad for them to put something like this in. We've had 2 attorney generals in a row who have been disciplined, and so I don't know what's wrong with an additional qualification for a statewide office holder to be like, look, you can't have been suspended, by the disciplinary commission as an attorney. If you are, then you're not eligible to be attorney general. I think that's a fair discussion to have, regardless of who is attorney general, regardless of whether they have a current case going on or not, because it's happened twice now. And you know, the first time we were kind of thrown into this, he was suspended for 30 days. Is it time for an interim? Does that create a vacancy? You know, I don't think it's a bad discussion to have for future reference.
There are absolutely gaps in law about how to handle the situation, not just for candidates, but also for currently serving attorneys general. One of the other, lawmakers also, one of the things I heard was, well, this was thrown into a bill at the last minute. This was the point I was going to make, which is they apparently didn't mind throwing things in the last minute to gut the Gaming Commission's power or to gut the public access counselor's power. So does that explanation hold water either?
No.
That's pretty disingenuous. No, I mean, that's the way the legislative process works. I mean, it's a convenient excuse. I get that, but no, this is more than that. I will say for Todd Rokita, it may or may not have dealt with him. We can leave that to others to decide. But this was a good session for him in two ways. He gets this, and he can carry a firearm in the State House.
That's true.
Now, one of the 4 office holders who earn the right to do that.
It's better that than his whole staff and this whole staff of
700
Secretary of State,
people,
the treasurer,
people versus 700 people.
Yeah. Is this a problem that needs to be addressed in state law at some point relatively soon? Because I don't think this ultimately was going to affect Todd Rokita this year. I don't think, even if he is disciplined again by the state Supreme Court, which is a major if, I don't think they're going to go straight from public reprimand to a year's suspension without automatic reinstatement, which is pretty much the length of time where without automatic reinstatement generally gets triggered. That seems extremely shocking.
Even
that would
after
be
you
shocking
stick your finger in the Supreme Court's eye.
Regardless, that I would be stunned if he's even reprimanded again. So I don't think this is going to affect him, but do they need to address this at some point?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that the last 2 attorney generals didn't spark this conversation. This didn't come out of nowhere, but I definitely think there's an appetite for it. I mean, this is the 3rd straight session, I think. You've seen some kind of attempts. None of them's been able to get across the finish line, but there has been efforts by Republican lawmakers to try to get something done about this. And I even think the language that they had was an effective compromise per se, because whenever you are talking about the disciplinary commission, you're not talking about one person that is upset with somebody that gets to single-handedly say, now you get this disciplinary action and you're going to be subject to a punishment. You have to go through the disciplinary commission, which is a panel, which ultimately you can appeal up to the Supreme Court. It's quite the process where if you do find to be in violation of a disciplinary complaint, you had a lot of way more educated people than me in order to decide that.
Those are some of the most respected legal minds, I think, in the state, and has been traditionally.
And so Senator Mike Gaskell was the one who brought the language in the committee, and he pointed out, rightfully so, which is on the candidate issue, you have a situation here where you could have someone who, becomes, is nominated at the convention, is the candidate for a party, and all of a sudden they might not be eligible to serve because they might not have their law license, or they might not have their law license anytime soon, and now you're left, and the party is left with, well, we can't replace them on the ballot because there's no mechanism for that.
Which brings up the point that this is not a constitutional office, and it ought to be appointed by the governor. He's the lawyer basically for the state of Indiana, but effectively he's also the governor's lawyer, and they can't be at odds with each other effectively. Having been in that position, I know it's bad, and we should take that away from elective office and make it appointed by the governor.
Well, the way to do that
like
is
a lot of other states.
The way that'll happen is if Destiny Wells or
that's probably
Beth White
true.
win the Attorney General's race.
Then they can do it retroactively, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, finally, retired lawyer and lobbyist Libby Zerniak, a maven of Indiana history, posted on social media recently about what was called the most disgraceful scene ever staged in the legislative halls of this state. At the end of the legislative session 111 years ago, 30 House members celebrated Sine Die by invading the Senate chamber and throwing waste baskets. Chris Mitchem, should they bring this tradition back?
I mean, I can just see it in my mind now, invading, just standing up on top of the gallery and just using all of gravity's force to pull it down. But, I think the most disgraceful thing that seems to be the common sense now is just killing bills at the last minute because you don't like certain legislators, which seems to be the trend.
That does seem to happen from time to time. Do you think we should bring back the invading the other chamber?
Well, the problem is they're all carrying now. That could... That might be the solution.
You don't think they were carrying then?
Yeah, they were probably carrying them too. It took a little longer to load back then.
Probably not semi-automatic
I'm also
weapons.
thinking our paperless, all-digital age that emptying wastebaskets might not have the same kind of cachet that it had 100.
iPads this
Throwing
time.
iPads might
do a little more damage,
yeah, a little more damage, certainly.
I love, if you don't follow Libby Zerniak on social media, you should. She has tons of gems like that. I love reading her stuff. It's always entertaining. That's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Chris Mitchem, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.